Hey, Providence Church, good morning to you guys. It's good to be with you in this manner today. I know that some of you are watching this by yourself. Some of you are at home with your family. Others of you have gathered in your city groups and you're watching this. And whatever the case, you're watching this. Man, we're just glad to be kind of connecting this morning. And I'm hoping that this is going to be an encouragement to you as we talk about kind of life and times and how the Bible and God intersect with this crazy week that's going on, or these crazy past couple weeks. Man, I knew on Thursday when I got an alert on my phone that Disneyland was shutting down and that March Madness was getting canceled all at the same time. I'm like, okay, the happiest place on earth is getting shut down and the most wonderful time of the year is being shut down. It's like, okay, people are panicking. There's chaos everywhere, and there's even people moving into isolation. Some people are doing it in probably good and healthy ways, other people maybe not so healthy ways, and it kind of begs the question, how are we supposed to respond in times like this? Well, I turned on that same Thursday, Sports Talk Radio, just to find out about sports cancellations, and the hosts of the show were talking about, hey, now that we have all this extra time because sports isn't on TV, what are we going to do with our time? And one of them gave the idea of binge watching 30 seasons of The Simpsons. I don't know if there's actually 30 seasons, but that kind of sounds like a horrible idea to me. Another guy was saying, hey, I'm going to watch all 23 Marvel movies in the order that they were set. And I'm like, okay, maybe one Marvel movie, but that seems crazy. And I think for us as the church, there is a unique way for us to respond. That God has set us apart as His people, and He has a purpose that He's trying to carry out, and that purpose can actually shine during chaotic times like this. We're in a series called Anticipating Easter, and the idea is to trace themes that go throughout the whole Bible, from the Old Testament to the end of the New Testament, and really see how Easter, or the death and resurrection of Jesus, is really the hinge point, the link to link the entirety of the Bible together. And Reese talked about God's image last week, and this week we're going to talk about God's people, or His redeemed people, and how He has set us apart uniquely in Jesus to be something different and to have a different or unique purpose. So I'm going to use about the next 10 minutes or so to trek through the whole Bible. I don't know if it's possible, but we're going to try it together, and I hope this is going to give us a vision for how we as the church can live out as God's people and His purposes in this somewhat chaotic time. So if you start from the beginning of the Bible, Genesis 1, we heard it last week, but God had a people. He had Adam and Eve that He chose, and He had a purpose for them. He wanted them to multiply, fill, and subdue the earth. The idea was to spread out and to bring God's rule and reign everywhere they could go. But you see that the next 10 chapters are just a downward spiral of doing exactly the opposite. You see in Genesis chapter 3, the fall, and when Adam and Eve disobeyed God. You see a chapter later, the episode with Cain and Abel and the murder of Cain's brother. You see in chapter 6, in Noah's day, that all the world had turned to evil and God has to send a flood and saves Noah as a righteous man. A couple chapters later, you even see Noah failing at that. And then it spirals all the way down to Genesis 11, where you see the Tower of Babel, and you're supposed to kind of see this as an inverse of creation story. The fact that everything is chaotic, and instead of multiplying and moving out to spread God's reign, they're actually gathering in a city. And instead of making God's name famous, they say that they want to make their own name famous. And instead of just staying on the earth, they're trying to climb up to God by building a tower to be able to invade into His realm. And at this point, God spreads them out and changes their language. And through all of this, it's not because God is maybe threatened by them, but because He sees Earth's potential and humans' potential, and He wants them to flourish in His way. And so the question is what does God do in chaos? How does God act when the world seems to hit rock bottom? Well, I think you see two things. You see that He picks a people for His possession, and He has a people to carry out His purposes. He wants an intimate connection with people, and then He wants them to carry out His purpose, His rule and reign on the earth. We see this right after the Tower of Babel in Genesis 12, when He comes up to Abraham, His future people. He says to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of earth shall be blessed. He picks a people for his possession. It's Abraham and his offspring. And then he picks them to carry out his original purpose. And it's kind of humbling in a time like ours, and even a moment like right now in these days, that God's priority is picking a people for himself, but also the primary way that his power is going to be unleashed on the earth is actually through his people. It's through us. So it begs us to ask, man, what are we going to do? Well, if you track through the Old Testament, you realize that God's people have actually messed this up a number of times. If you fast forward to the book of Exodus, one book later, you find that Abraham's offspring, through some sin, through some chaos and unfortunate circumstances, they actually find themselves in slavery in Egypt. And God once again has to intervene. He comes on through plagues and through the parting of the Red Sea. He saves his people once again, and you see what his priority is. The same thing in Exodus 19. He comes to Moses on Mount Sinai, and he says, "You shall be my treasured possession among all peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." You see, he repicks his people at this point. He re-chooses them. He says, hey, I want to be intimately connected with you. He wants this people to live for his purpose, to be a kingdom of priests, to be his mediators of his ways, his purposes on earth. So you think, okay, this is the second time he's done it. They probably end happily ever after, right? Well, if you've read through the Old Testament, you notice that there are just as many stories, or way more stories of failures than there are of maybe successes. The Old Testament is filled with people turning from God, and it maybe hits once again another low point where you see God's people actually get taken in exile to Babylon. And in the midst of this, God does the same thing again, but he switches it a little bit at this time. And in Jeremiah 31, he says, I'm going to mark a line in the sand, and I'm going to intervene this time. He says in Jeremiah 31, "Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel." And he says, in this moment, I'm going to write the law in your hearts. I'm going to be your God, and you're going to be my people. It's the same thing, gathering a people for his purpose, but this time God says, I'm going to take it into my own hands this time. And in a moment when Roman oppression and rule was widespread, and the people of Israel, God's people, their hearts were far from him, God himself stepped in, his son stepped in the person of Jesus to fulfill these covenants. Jesus stepped in to be Abraham's offspring, that Abraham's descendants never actually were. He fulfills all these promises. God wanted a people so bad, and he wanted his purposes to go forward so bad, that he took matters into his own hands. He came down to earth, and he lived out the covenant perfectly. Jesus was Abraham's perfect offspring. He also took on Satan, sin, and death on the cross, the real enemy in this moment, and delivered a death blow to them so that whoever believes in him can be part of this eternal family, can be indwelt by this Spirit, can be a part of this people that God truly desires. Because of Jesus, it's why you look at Revelation 5, and it's not just one nation that's worshiping at the very end of time, but it's people from every tribe, tongue, and nation. It's why you look at Revelation 21, one chapter from the very end of the Bible, and you see the climax, the culmination of all existence, of all time, and you see this loud voice coming from heaven, and God says, I will be their God, and they will be my people, and there will be no more pain, no more tears, no more death. This has been God's purpose from the beginning. And you see, as you look to the end of the Bible, it's the same purpose, and he comes through Jesus, and he creates this opportunity for there to be a people for his own possession, and a people that will carry out his purposes. And so for us this morning, this begs the question, okay, in the middle of chaos that we're experiencing right now, God has a way that he wants to move. He brings people's hearts near him, and he really pushes out on mission. How are we going to live out as God's redeemed people during this time? Well, first, I think that God wants to create a greater sense of intimacy in us. That we could give ourselves to watching endless videos and reading endless articles online and watching people post on social media about the coronavirus, and to soak our minds with that, and to maybe be filled with fear and anxiety, and to be overly hungry for any sort of knowledge that we can get, or we could let this drive us to intimacy in Jesus. And I would challenge us, hey, could we set aside time, maybe even more time, to be intentional in pushing in to Jesus, to turn from things that distract us and actually get down on our knees and pray, be in the Word, and really lean into our intimacy. The second thing is that I think in this time that we need to be the church. We need to carry out His purposes that God has given us. And I love what's going on. So just a couple days ago, I think it was Friday, I got a text or a call, from one of our volunteers, who's one of our key volunteers at our Lewis and Clark Middle School partnership. And she said, man, my heart is heavy during this time. And I think she said literally down on her knees and praying out loud that God would give us clarity. How could we love the students at Lewis and Clark and their families during this time? And she said, as she was praying out loud, she got a text from another one of our city group leaders that said, hey, our city group wants to be all in for helping to provide food or whatever is needed for some of the families who may be reliant on school lunches and the things the school provides. I thought, man, that's being the church. And so she called me and she said, hey, would it be possible if there's more than this city group can do that we could use maybe some of our local mission church budget to do that? And I said, man, we could empty out our church budget to do that. And then we'll figure it out later. We can go do some fundraising appointments and restock that budget one way. But this is the time to be the church, right? I think that in sermons, and I've done this many times before, us pastors like to talk about stories about how in Acts, the early church was radical and they sacrificed, they did all this stuff. And then we say, man, in 260 AD in Alexandria, when there was a plague, the Christians just stood out as caring for the sick and dying, knowing that they would be infected with this. But we tell stories like this, and we laud the church of the past, but I think now we have a moment where it's time that we can be the church. We can step up and we can create our own moment as God's redeemed people for His purposes. And so what I want to do for you, just to give you 2 quick application points, is to encourage you to pray. So if you're by yourself, you can do this. If you're with a group of people, you can do this. And the first thing is just to pray for intimacy with God. Could you pray that you would be a people that lean into Jesus during this season and really experience a closeness, a nearness to His heart during the season? So take some time to pray for that, and then after that, take some time to pray that we could be a people that fulfill His purposes. Pray that God would bring to mind people to minister, groups to minister to, and then let's actually do that. Let's be obedient to this call. So pray for intimacy, then pray for God's purposes in His mission. Providence, it was great to be with you for a little bit this morning. I'm excited to see how God is going to use us as His redeemed people through this unique season.